Have you ever played a game and then once you finished it, you had a ton of thoughts, but you couldn't remember how you felt during the beginning of the game? I decided to write down my thoughts while playing the game in real time, so I'm writing this script as I play through this game. I'm curious of how my thoughts and feelings will change during my time with each game, so I'm going to write my thoughts down at 1 hour, 5 hour, 10 hour, and 20 hour, and then the end of each game that I complete in this series. The game we're playing this time is the newly released Ys 10 Nordics, a JRPG series that I haven't given enough love to in the past, but this one looks extremely good. Ys 10 Nordics follows the story of Adol as he has another one of his adventures, but this time in an open sea and the surrounding islands. What crazy situations is he going to find himself in this time, and how will he coexist with a new character in the game named Karja? While writing down my thoughts and talking about this game, it's possible there will be spoilers, so if you haven't played this one yet and don't want anything spoiled, I would consider coming back to this video once you've played through the game. This is my spoiler warning just in case though. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. If you've also played this game, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I'm excited to start playing, so I'll check back in once I hit the 1 hour mark. After playing around an hour of gameplay, this game throws a lot of things at you. The story ramps up only minutes after starting the game. We play as Adol Kristen, a young swordsman journeying on a boat heading to Salsetta. At the beginning, he's with his friend Doji, a strong blue-haired man, and Dr. Flare, a doctor attempting to find a specific flower that can only be found in Salsetta. Shortly after meeting our friends and having some light conversation about our goals, we decide to talk to the captain of the ship that begins to point out amazing views throughout Obelia Gulf. But this is quickly interrupted by another ship coupling with ours, and a group of pirates board the ship looking for the captain. But since Adol knows no fear, he decides to fight a few of them to defend his friends. This leads us right into basic combat for the game. This game is an action RPG, so to start off the game, we only have a normal attack button, and we can lock onto targets to make sure we land our attacks. These pirates are very weak and don't do much in the way of attacking since we're learning how to play the game. Once we defeat them, we're confronted by a girl that seems to be the leader or captain of the ship. She attacks us, calling us a mercenary, so right away we have to fight her. This unlocks the ability to guard against attacks and evade out of the way. I think this is going to take a bit to get used to because it feels a bit flowy. You're almost like flying when you evade out of the way. Once we get her health to about halfway, the fight ends. Then a man tells her that we're not a mercenary and that they found the captain of the boat and have him restrained. This leads into a cutscene where we find out that this group of pirates are called the Sea Bolta, and they control the Gulf and require a toll to be paid when passing through. Since this captain didn't pay the toll and was attempting to hire mercenaries to get past, they decided that he can't pay his debt to them and the woman strikes him down with her axe. Then our ship is escorted to a small village on the coast known as Karnak. Adol and his friends head to the tavern and learn that they're going to be stuck there for a while, and they don't have enough gold saved up to stay there and to still make it to Salsetta, meaning that they're going to need to find work in order to save up some gold to leave later on. While in the tavern, we meet a young girl that is the daughter of the tavern, and she tells us about this myth of the Sea Throne on one of the islands that can grant us any wish. Her name is Rosalind, and so far she seems very nice and helpful. And then we meet a drunk that's sitting at the other table. He really doesn't tell us that much, but I found that he was hilarious. He ends up being like that sad old man that wishes that he could go back to his youth. The other man at the table tells us that the village is looking for dock workers and temporary members for the militia. So Adol decides he's going to head there, and Doji is going to the docks to make some money. Dr. Flare tells us that he's seen that they were looking for help at the clinic and decides that he's going to help out to make some gold. Then we can leave. Once outside, we hear a voice that tells us to come find it. It's a woman's voice and it's pretty annoying, I won't even lie about it. After exploring around the village for a while, I found that there was a bunch of problems going on around here. There's a rock slide blocking the road out of town, and that the Bolta has everyone scared to say anything about them, and they pretty much control everything. We head to the militia and meet a guy by the name of Gren that is the only one there and is about our age. We tell him that we're going to join the militia, and he tells us that we have to come back tomorrow to do so. Once we finish that cutscene, the voice calls out to us again. We follow it over to a seashell that is sitting on the beach, And after picking up the seashell, we hear the voice from before, figuring out where it came from. But before we can figure out anything or ask any questions, we're attacked by a wolf that can heal itself every time we attack it. This causes the shell to trigger, and it teaches us mana, or our skills in this game, which we can attach to X, triangle, circle, or square since I'm playing the PS5 version. And to use them, all we have to do is hold down the R1 button. This allows for us to kill the wolf thing, and the shell tells us that we need to find her. She also tells us that her name is Leela, but before we can find out where she is, the shell stops working and we can't talk to her anymore. We tell our friends and then we sleep for the night. The next morning we get a letter from someone at the tavern, which is weird because no one knew we would end up there. And it tells us to meet whoever wrote it at the beach, which we do, and it ends up being the girl pirate from before. She wants to check something out and we have to fight her again. This little fight teaches us about attacks that can be blocked or evaded, and we just have to get her health down about halfway again before we get another cutscene where she asks us how we were able to use mana, but she's mean about it. We're then attacked by wolves again, but this time there is a bunch of them and we learn how to use duo mode, which is when we can attack and defend without talking to the other person. It's almost like we sync our minds so that we don't have to talk in order to know what the other person's thinking. We use this ability and then we beat down all the wolves. She tells us after that she doesn't know how we can use mana, but she needs to check in at the command post. But this is when we find out we're attached to her by a mana handcuff. So we try to break it and we can't. After a bunch of failures, she tells us that she could just cut off our hand, and then she tells us who she is and that her dad might know what to do about the handcuff, but she doesn't know where he currently is. Her name is Karja Balta, and she's the daughter of the leader of the Sea Balta Pirates, or the Norman faction. We don't have much choice but to go with her at this point, and that was the 1 hour mark. A lot took place, but it really just added a million questions about the world. Speaking of the world, this game looks great. I'm really impressed by the graphics and just how the village feels lived in and special. There isn't much to explore in it yet, but I think the artist did a wonderful job with this one. I also really like Adol's character model and his outfit. It fits the ocean beach setting. I think the combat is good so far, but I feel like I'm going to need to do more of it before I get used to how it works. Because I've been taking hits for absolutely no reason, just because I forget where the evade and the skill buttons are mapped. So far I like the game, and I want to know more about what's happening in the world. And now that we're handcuffed to Karja, how is the story going to work? I'll check back in at the 5 hour mark and see how I'm feeling about it then. After the 5 hour mark, the story has been blown wide open. There is so much happening, but since I'm going to try not to spoil anything for the story, let me say that things happen that force us to steal an old boat in the shipyard to escape Karnak. This introduces a new mechanic in the game, which is boat combat. I won't say that there is too much to this yet, because we have a basic attack and one special cannon attack, and that's it. But we're fully in control of the boat and can even speed it up when we need to avoid attacks from enemies. I think this is going to play a huge role in the gameplay cycle later in the game, but for now it's still pretty basic. We're introduced to a different clan that the Norman called the Grieger clan, but they're advancing more than the Normans have seen, so this adds another question to the world. We get to a new island, the Balta Island, and this allows us to see the world from the Norman perspective. And we even get enlisted because of our use of mana being extremely rare. This island lets us buy new equipment and armor, which is the first time in the game that we've had this option. One of the cool things is that we can either pay with gold to buy items, or we can barter objects that we find throughout the world to barter for those objects. This means that it seems to pay off when in a dungeon to check all of the plants, pots, and crates. All this leads up to us having to achieve a Rite of Brotherhood. In order for us to complete that, we have to take our new boat to get to the new island. But that's where the gameplay cycle ended for me. The rest of that time I was fighting basic enemies and learning a bunch about the story. We even had a moment where Adol zoned out and we met an old guy that lived alone on an island. We didn't get anything else from this, and I have no clue what any of that even meant. As for gameplay, we're learning some new skills and can even get double attack power while in duo mode, which is always helpful with the more challenging missions. And the last new thing to mention in gameplay is that we got this mana grappling hook that allows for us to jump over gaps on the map and swing directly into battle, getting the upper hand. There is a large cast of characters we've met now, and each one of them have a really good opening character development, so I'm excited to see how they expand that in the future. I could talk a lot about story right here, but I don't want to because I don't want to spoil anything. So those are my overall thoughts after completing about 5 hours of gameplay. It's very story heavy, but I'm still really enjoying myself at this point, so I'll check back in at the 10-hour mark and see what new things we've discovered and my thoughts then. After 10 hours of gameplay, I'm more invested than I was before. Not even 5 minutes after I hit the 5-hour mark, we unlocked a brand new character development option. This allows for us to farm and craft what are called mana seeds to upgrade our character stats. It sort of reminds me of the Final Fantasy X grid system in a way, but instead of there being a pre-existing stat increase, we can just add a mana seed in and move our stats in the direction we want for each character. Since both Adol and Karja have their own stats, skills, and equipment, we can really build each character completely different. We also had a huge reveal in the story that I sort of expected, but not completely. This also happened not how I expected it to take place, but it ends up being pretty important for the story and gameplay cycle. I got to meet the second and third commanders of the Grieger army, and each one of them are completely different, but all a bit crazy. I actually really enjoy them as characters so far though. We got caught in some bad currents and ended up on an island where ships go to crash and die. In this area, we learned how to fish because what's a good JRPG without some fishing? It's extremely basic, but seems that there are a lot of places around the world that have different fish and sea creatures, giving us different items too. We unlocked another new ability to use in combat and on the islands, and that's the Golan board. An ancient treasure that allows the player to glide around on it, to avoid deep water, follow mana lines, and jump to new areas. I feel like this is an interesting thing to add in, and I'm not sure how much it's going to get used after this main section. I've noticed that certain sections of this game don't look as great as the main areas, but it doesn't bother me that much, so it's fine. But you can tell where most of the time went when designing this game. I've made it to around level 24 now, and I'm starting to really only take damage and have issues from mini bosses and main bosses, so that makes going through each area feel pretty quick and painless. We've unlocked another thing we need to do when exploring, but it's very story related, so I won't mention what it is, but I actually really like that it was added into the game. The last thing I wanted to point out is that the voice acting and cutscenes in this game are very good. I recognize a lot of the voice actors, and I feel like they actually cared about this project. It's a shame that Adol doesn't talk more because Bryce Papenbrook is usually very good in most things he does, and he barely talks in this game. We're going to take a much larger jump this time around, and I'll check back in at the 20-hour mark. This is usually when we have all the mechanics and I have an idea of where the game is headed. I'm not sure how long this game will take to complete, but I'll check back in at the 20-hour mark, so I'll see you then. I'm 20 hours into the game now, and I've unlocked a bunch of new mechanics for it. I have 2 brand new abilities that use mana. We can use the Mana Sense, which will allow for us to see buried treasures around each island, and this will finally let me get 100% explored on all the smaller islands. And a bit later this gets upgraded and we can now slow down time. This will allow for us to get around enemies and even enter doors that would close too quickly at normal speed, and falling platforms that would fall too fast. I love that even this far in the game, we're getting new and improved mechanics for exploring. I've reached level 40 now, and I'm dishing out an insane amount of damage to enemies. I have Adol strength around 350, which is almost 150 more than Karja, which I've been building her as more of a defensive tank. I have a bunch of upgrades to the ship now that allow for better combat and speed, which makes traveling the ocean so much easier. I even have a much larger crew now, offering things like blacksmithing, growing crops, medicine creating, and characters that cook and make lunchboxes for our characters for extra buffs. The ship is beginning to remind me of somewhere that you could live without much issue. I have 2 parts of the ocean 100% complete now, and I've also been working on side quests and fishing, which has slowly turned into something that I always do when reaching a new area or island that lets me. We have new types of boat combat where we need to take down a bunch of ships and this totem in the water. We're timed while doing these, and there are tasks that pop up on the side of the screen, like sink 3 ships or use 3 special attacks. If we can complete those tasks, then our level for the battle increases. The highest level we can reach is 10, and that helps us get an S rank for the battle. Once we complete the boat combat section, we land at an island and we have to race through a tunnel, cave, or building defeating the enemies as quickly as we can. This is the second part and also factors into getting S rank for the mission. I actually really like these battles and I wish there was more of them. I'm really enjoying the game, and the speed of the combat has really kept me interested in battling every single enemy and collecting materials I need for upgrades. I'm not sure how many more sections of the ocean we'll explore during the story, but just keep them coming. The story has gotten extremely good, and at the 20-hour mark, I sort of left myself with a cliffhanger, which just makes me more excited to see how it plays out. I want to give credit to the writers in this game because they've done an amazing job keeping the story engaging and adding personality to all the characters we meet along the way. They even added some big reveals that I didn't expect, which is always good. This game is very story heavy, and a lot of the times it feels like the combat is a second thought, which this is fine for me, but something that other gamers might not enjoy as much. I've also noticed a little bit of slowdown. This usually doesn't take place during anything overly demanding, it's just like during a conversation randomly. It might just have a stutter skip in the frame rate. I'm not really sure why it does that, and it could be a PS5 thing, but I've noticed it happen from time to time, and it's just weird. There isn't much more to talk about since a lot of the game is story, but I'm still really enjoying my time with this game, and I can't wait to finally get an answer to some of the questions that the game sets up in the very early hours that we still don't have an answer for. So with that being said, I'll be back one last time for my endgame thoughts and a mini review. I don't know how many hours that will be, but I'll let you know when that happens. So I'll check back in then. I've completed Ys 10 Nordics and logged 40 hours into this game, getting 100% in all the explorable areas, but missed some upgrades and some other small things. My characters ended up being level 89 at the end of the game, which is insane in my opinion, but the game does a really good job scaling along the way, so I never felt the need to grind, or I never felt like I was extremely over-leveled for any section of the game. I was able to even beat the secret boss before finishing the game, and that was a tough fight. That was the only time during my entire playthrough of this game that I actually died in combat. After the 20-hour mark, there wasn't much more in the way of mechanics that I can really talk about. It's all about moving the plot along and beating enemies along the way. I don't want to spoil anything with the story, but I think the final outcome and everything leading to the end was done really well. I wouldn't change anything about how they did that. The combat sometimes gets a bit repetitive, but changing skills really helps with that, if that's a problem for you. I think this game does everything just about right when playing, and the character development along the way is top notch. Not that I'm surprised by this coming from a Falcom game, but I can now add this to the list of JRPGs that I completed, and this becomes the second Ys game that I've completed in the series. I think I should play more of them in the future. One of my favorite things in this game is just how fun the boat combat becomes once your ship is upgraded and doesn't move like a snail anymore. The new weapons and abilities to get for the ship just make doing the fights a lot of fun. Ys 10 is definitely a slow burn, but it's worth it in my opinion. If you didn't do all the extra side stuff like I did, you could probably complete this one in under 30 hours, as long as you're good at the combat. If I had to give this a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, I think this would get a solid 8.5 out of 10 for me. I think how slow the beginning of the game is could really turn off potential new players, but once it gets going, the game gives you a bunch of overlapping stories that make you just want to find out what's going to happen, and how is it all connected. The combat is fun, but it can get old if you don't change it up, so I definitely recommend going through the different skills and just seeing what you like. The world is beautiful, and there is very solid character development. If I had to pick my favorite character in the game, it's probably Gren. So if you've played this game and you also like Gren, you kind of understand why. With all that being said, I think 8.5 is a perfect spot for this one. Well, that's been my thoughts throughout my playthrough of Ys 10 Nordics. I hope that you enjoyed this video and just how my thoughts of the game changed over the span of me playing through it. Maybe this even gave you that extra little push to go out and buy this one yourselves and give it an opportunity. If you want to see more content like this, let me know in the comments that you liked this video and what other JRPGs you would want me to check out. Remember to like this video because it helps out my channel. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button for more JRPG content, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.